Hey everyone, I'm Chris Lesniak.
And I'm Rob Byer, and this is
the Debate Math Podcast. We have an exciting debate on today's episode.
And we thought we'd do something a little different in this episode, as we are going to hear from students.
And when we talked with a few students, the first topic we heard was that we should have a debate about allowing notes on tests.
And we thought that would be a great topic to debate. So today we have two student teams of two debating the resolution. Let them use notes.
And here debating for the resolution that we should allow students to use notes on assessments. We have two wonderful students from my former home of Los Angeles. First up is Briana. Hi, Briana.
Hi.
Can you tell our listeners where you are and what your current math class is, maybe?
Of course. So I'm from Los Angeles, and I'm currently taking AP Calculus, AB, and AP Stats.
And arguing along with her is her partner in this, Jahnie. Hi, Jahnie.
Hi.
And where are you and what is your current math class?
Hi, I'm from Los Angeles and I am taking Calculus AB.
All right. Now, the question we want to ask all of our guests is, when did math first become controversial to you? Back to Briana there. Can you answer that for us?
I think ever since elementary school and sometimes even middle school, boys were always kind of prioritized in math and given the more challenging problems. And it was always kind of said to girls that I know that we weren't inclined towards math and STEM fields. And so a lot of that has kind of driven me to be better in those fields. So.
Okay, thank you for that. And Jahnie?
I think I really noticed controversy in math in ninth grade, just being in a class over the summer, and there were students of color and there were students who were not people of color, and just how we were treated differently. And even though we did have the same grades, the teacher would come up to the people of color and ask why we were struggling or what we needed help with, and they wouldn't ask the other students who were not people of color.
Wow. Those are amazing, powerful stories. Thank you both for sharing.
And now we have a team of two coming from all the way across most of the country in Ohio, arguing against the resolution. They have arguments on why teachers should not allow notes on the assignments or in assessments. First up is Grace. Hi, Grace. So, Grace, can you tell our listeners where you are and what your current math class is?
I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm currently a junior, and I'm taking advanced pre-calculus.
Wow, thanks. And arguing alongside her is Alex. Hi, Alex.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Let us know where you are and what your current math class is.
So I'm also in Columbus, Ohio. I'm also a junior, and I'm in advanced pre-calculus.
Awesome. So now the question that we ask all of our guests again, when did math first become controversial to you? Grace, we'll kick it to you first.
For me, math first became controversial last year when I had a teacher that taught advanced algebra 2. And he was on Zoom with a whiteboard. And I slept during the class more than I learned. And that's when I started to believe that the math classes I took wouldn't impact my future career. And the stuff that I was learning was irrelevant.
Wow. And Alex, when did math first become controversial to you?
Yeah, so I'd have to say it was coming into my freshman year. Up until that point, I saw the application of everything that I was learning. But after entering high school, I realized the information I was absorbing was just to prepare me for the following year's math class. This made me question whether or not I actually needed the information or whether it was just to continue the cycle of preparation.
Wow, thank you both.
And with that, let's get into the debate. And we begin with opening statements from each of our speakers. You each have 2 minutes to present your arguments. And based on a coin flip before this recording, we're starting with the pro side. That's Briana and Jahnie, why we should allow notes on tests. And Briana, you said you're going to go first. You have 2 minutes and your time begins now.
So hi, my name is Briana, and I'm going to explain some of the reasons why I believe that notes should be allowed on tests, quizzes, and assessments. I believe there are many reasons, but one of them that has consistently stuck out to me the most is the fact that on tests and quizzes, there are most of the time multiple methods to solve or assess a problem or equation. If a student is allowed to use notes on tests, tests are better able to assess the mastery of a topic over just the memorization of equations, dates, or even different concepts. And one might argue that having that information there next to you is kind of giving the student the answer. But I think it's more than just giving the answer. A student has to be able to apply everything they know to be able to use an equation or information properly. Even more so, I think there's a lot of tests that kind of just assess memorization over execution. If we look at standardized tests like the ACT or the SAT, many students go into practice classes and training, and they memorize strategies rather than mastery of each individual concept. And that's what allows them to get higher scores.
And thank you, Briana. And now we're going to hear from the opposing side, starting with Grace. Grace, you have 2 minutes, and your time begins now.
For the sake of today's debate, my partner and I side with the statement that students should not have a note card or an open note test. My first contention is that when students have a note card or notes, it takes them longer to find the solution than to do the problem. Students don't prepare as much because they think they'll be able to use their note card during an assessment. And when the test date comes and they rely solely on the notes that they brought to the class, if the test is application-based and not definition-based, the student could find themselves taking more time to figure out how to do the problem with their notes rather than if they simply studied. Creating a note card and studying can take the same amount of time, but studying creates a more solid foundation and understanding going into the test. This leads me to my next contention, which is that mentally, with a note card, students are less stressed about a test. The right amount of stress boosts motivation and decision-making, which leads students to achieve goals. When students have a note card, it leads to their stress levels decreasing because they feel as though all the resources needed to perform well are on the note card. When the student arrives to the test, they are less prepared because they have less motivation to study, leading to a poorer grade. Students use the excuse of a note card to understudy, and for these reasons, my partner and I strongly agree that students should not use a note card or have open note tests.
All right, thank you. And now we hear again from the pro side with Jahnie. Jahnie, you have 2 minutes, and your time begins now.
Hi, my name is Jahnie, and I am pro notes on test exams. Have you ever just been in a lesson or just watching a teacher teach and they're reading right off a board or they're just looking at their notes? Imagine if they didn't have that. Imagine if they didn't have the presentation or the PowerPoint or the notes. What would they do? Most likely, they would not know everything they're supposed to teach a student, or they wouldn't remember the full lesson plan, and they would just kind of be as lost as the students in some parts of their lesson. This can kind of go full circle back to other professions, such as doctors or just lawyers. If you're talking to a doctor and they're trying to diagnose you, obviously when they go to a different room, they're going to look at their notes, they're going to look at online resources, or they're going to talk to other doctors about how to diagnose you. Imagine if they didn't have all the resources, what would they do? They would kind of just be guessing or just making an educated guess on what they're supposed to diagnose you for. And I feel like that goes full circle back to students. If you're taking a test or doing a quiz or an assessment, doesn't mean you don't know the stuff you're learning. It just means having notes or just a couple of resources helps you figure out what to do with an equation or what to do with a problem. And if we don't have those resources or those notes, we feel kind of lost. So it's kind of just our guidance or just a little refresher on what to do in the test. And if in our future profession, if we're allowed to use notes or resources or outside help, why can't we start doing that now?
Thank you, Jahnie. And last but not least, we have Alex. Alex, you have 2 minutes and your time begins now.
Should notes be allowed or not? This is the question that math teachers across the nation find themselves asking. As my partner stated earlier, we firmly believe that notes should not be allowed on student assessments. My first contention is that the usage of notes yields bad study habits that remain with students in higher forms of education. When thinking about whether or not to use notes, teachers need to consider the habits that they're forcing students to adopt. Using notes makes a student less efficient in their studying, and it causes said student to bank on always having an out to the more challenging problems. After high school, whether a student chooses to pursue a college-level education or not, they're going to experience some type of examination, and it is likely that this examination is not going to permit the use of notes. When this time comes, students who use notes on tests are going to struggle at a higher rate than students who do not use notes. My second contention is that when partaking in closed book assessments, students procure a superior mastery of the subject. Without notes, students are forced to have a deeper engagement with the material as opposed to copying information onto a note card. They will often feel more confident with the material going into the tests, which feeds into their mental health, as my partner mentioned earlier. With this confidence comes a greater retention of the subject. All teachers have the goal of just that, teaching, and a student cannot consider themselves taught if they do not retain the material that they learned. Several distorted studies have shown that students who take closed book assessments walk out of the test with a greater understanding of the material and will often remember the material for a longer period of time. For these two reasons, my partner and I agree with the conjecture that all assessments should be that of closed book.
Okay, thank you all four of you. You gave us a lot to think about already. I hear lots of different ideas here, and I like that both teams tied it into the real world, talking about in real jobs or in college, we may or may not have notes. So there's definitely arguments on both sides of that in both classroom and real world. So let's jump right into the question round here. And Rob, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so this is actually for both sides. I think we need to define something first. So do we see open note and open book testing as the same thing? And also, where does open internet fall within this? So open note, open book testing, are they the same thing? And where does open internet fall within this? And I actually will go with Alex and Grace. You can start.
When it comes to open note, I feel like it's not completely just like having your notes in front of you. I feel like it's more of you have to be selective with what you're bringing to the test, because that forces students to actually study before tests. And then with the internet,
I mean, open internet is kind of just searching. And I feel like that kind of falls closer to open book, because open book, you kind of have all of the information your teacher is teaching you. So I feel like on the spectrum, it goes open note is closer to acceptable than open book and then open internet.
And Jahnie and Briana, well, what would you say to open note versus open book? And then also, where does open internet fall?
I feel that open note and open book and open internet, I feel that open book and open internet do fall closer together than open notes, because for open notes, you do have to just get the information yourself and you're physically writing down the notes yourself. And for a book, you can just really open up the book and just look at the knowledge. And I feel like that goes the same way for the internet, except it's just digital.
Yeah, I agree. Open note can be more of an assessment of what you've retained throughout the lesson. And really it's up to the teacher to put a limit as to if it's open note from the entire unit, or maybe you have a note card that you can write a certain amount of information on. With open internet, I've had certain teachers call that open resource, and that's kind of like an assessment of how you're able to use your resources. Because even if you have access to internet, there's a lot of stuff on the internet that is incorrect. So it's up to you to determine and figure out what seems right and what seems wrong based on what you've learned before.
So Briana and Jahnie, I'm coming back to you again with, so your pro note, what do those notes look like? What's on them? What is detailed within the notes? Is it a full notebook? Are there note cards? Could you paint us a picture of what these notes look like?
I think it really just depends on the teaching style and how the teachers want you to write the notes. I know that in some classes, for my notes, my teacher will give us questions, and then we basically base our notes off of those questions because we know mentally that's what's going to be on the test. Or just when someone's doing a PowerPoint, we can just jot down what we think is most important. I know that for math, when I'm taking notes, I really try and just write down the equations because I just know that's going to be most handy for me because I work well with equation problems rather than word problems. So I just know I'm going to take what I feel is most important to me to write down. And for me, those are the equations.
Yeah, I agree with Jahnie. A lot of it is based on the guidelines that the teacher implements. And I think that there can be certain situations where you would kind of summarize your notes from the entire year or semester. Like I know one time I was allowed a small note card on a math final, and I wrote down basically equations that I thought I would need, some logarithmic rules and stuff that would kind of help me, things that I needed the most help with. But I think there are other cases where there are certain details that need to be written down.
For Alex and Grace, they just mentioned something about writing down all these formulas. Now, do you feel that a formula sheet would be acceptable? Or is that something that you would feel that also needs to be kind of memorized and stored away?
I'd have to say that, yes, I think a formula sheet would definitely be acceptable. The problem comes when the note sheet turns into more like everything you did in class, as opposed to just key parts that are necessary to work on the test. But beside that, yeah, I think formula sheet would be good.
And I agree, because I think you can use the formulas and you apply your knowledge to the formulas don't give away anything on the test.
So I'm wondering, Briana and Jahnie, so if we use notes, it could be good. You talked about we should write better tests as teachers, like calling us out a little bit. I wonder, should notes be allowed on everything? Like you talked about in the real world, people have notes, but like on the SAT, you're not allowed to notes. So like, what should teachers do? Like what is too much or too little for teachers, at least in math class?
I think, again, it depends. I know that, for example, when I was doing related rates in Calculus A, we were given about 10 different equations to learn in a week, but then on the test, we couldn't use any of the equations. So it's really just like mentally trying to remember all of that. And that's pretty hard when you're given 5 days to memorize 10 equations in 10 different setups. So I think that's necessary when taking a test. I think other things, it may not be as necessary. Pretend you're just learning one equation or just one method of word problems. I think it's important. Yeah, we should not always rely on notes, but in some cases, I think it's necessary, and it's just more fair to let students have notes, because I think it's unreasonable to just give students all these equations and then expect them to just know everything when you give them a piece of paper.
And then maybe to the other side, would you say there are some times where notes are, and what are they, like quizzes versus tests or certain kinds of assessments, or what might be an acceptable time when notes should be used or should be allowed?
I think an acceptable time to use notes is when you have an application-based test. So when it's not like straight definitions. In my experience in environmental science, which is a class I take, it's almost all application-based. She gives us a note card, and you almost have to know all of your notes to be able to take the test.
Or even like essays for either history or English. Whenever you have like a wide scope of things to cover, just like main points would be nice to go in with. But beside that, yeah, I'd say that's about it.
So coming back to you, Alex and Grace, earlier in the opening statements from Briana and Jahnie, Jahnie mentioned something about doctors and lawyers using notes. And are we not acknowledging the real world if we say that we can't use notes or phones or Google? So how would you respond to that?
I agree that doctors and lawyers should be able to use notes, but like whenever they had to get up into a point where they could do what they have to do, and right, whenever they're taking those assessments in med school or for studying for the bar exam, they obviously did not have notes then. So I think it's more to prepare you for what you want to do as opposed to when you're actually doing that said profession.
I want to bring up the idea, I think it was Grace you brought up about the stress, or maybe it was Alex, about upping the stress level by not having the notes, and that it's actually good for performance. So what do you say to students who have a high anxiety, especially in math? People get a lot of math anxiety. So how can we as teachers up that seriousness about the test, like you're talking about the stress level, but also not have people break down from going crazy for math anxiety?
Yeah, so I think there's a fine line between too much stress and a healthy amount of stress. So I think notes do take away some of the stress if people have a lot of anxiety or test anxiety. At the same time, that healthy stress does motivate people. And I think the people that have a lot of test anxiety do better under stress. Like they get higher grades when they have that stress that's placed on them through families. And I feel like when you add that note card, it takes away some of the stress that they put on themselves.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you don't want kids coming in crazy freaking out about something. But like, you also don't want them coming in thinking it's just going to be a breeze when otherwise it would be a pretty difficult assessment without notes. So, I mean, you have to find that balance of where the stress levels are good or not. And
I think that's where teachers can't help that. I think it's more students and their mindsets.
Yep.
Okay. And let me follow up with that with Briana and Jahnie then. So you're on the other side. So if we allow notes, are students going to be too relaxed all the time, or is it going to be too late? Are they not going to take it seriously? Or they take too long on the test? Like, are we being too easy or too light?
I think that notes, I don't think it makes, of course, it helps ease you. I don't think it makes you completely laxed or relaxed. I know that for personal experience, when I'm on a test, I already have anxiety coming into the test. And then when I don't remember a certain equation or a certain formula, I kind of just mentally think, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail this test. And it just ruins my mentality for the rest of the test. And I feel like it actually makes me have a worse grade in the end. And so when I just had that little refresher, or that little guidance on a little piece of paper, just having that little formula, that can help me push through for the rest of the test.
Yeah, I think a lot of it also is teachers can set it up. So like if they give a forewarning, like at the beginning of the unit saying, hey, like this is going to be an open note test, but just make sure you guys are taking notes throughout the unit. I think that is going to make a lot of students want to pay attention more during lectures, retain more information, and write down more than they would if they kind of know, okay, I have all this time to study the night before the test or something like that.
So this is going to come back to you, Briana and Jahnie. Could notes or should notes be limited to just open-ended tests and not multiple choice tests, or are you okay with them being for both?
I think everything just depends on just the severity of the test. I feel that open-ended tests, I do believe that we should use note cards. For multiple choice, I mean, there could be limits. A teacher could check the flashcards or the notes before starting the test. So you can limit your students to what you want them to write down. So I feel like it just depends on what the teacher believes should be on the note cards and shouldn't be on the note cards.
I agree. I think for tests that kind of target application and mastery of concepts, then definitely notes could be allowed. But I feel like if it's something, say a vocabulary test where you kind of are trying to learn the words and learn the definitions, then that might be something where notes should be more limited.
So Jahnie, real quick, a follow-up, and then I'll let Mr. Loves go back. So you said something about like maybe teachers could like look over the notes. Do you feel that teachers would be able to do that? For instance, like when I taught, largest school I taught at had, I think I saw around 200 kids in a day. Is that something that teachers would be okay with, or do you think your teachers would be able to do or want to do to check everybody's note card going into a test?
I think for some teachers, I know that in personal experience, they will go around the room and they will kind of just skim over people's note cards. But I feel like other teachers, they just have good faith in their students to know that maybe they will just follow the requirements for the notes and the flashcards. But I think it's important to have a conversation with your students before and talk to them about what they can put on the on the note cards and what they can't put on the note cards. And then after, if you realize that they weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's your time to talk about just lecturing or just, I don't know, punishment or something. But I think that it could be necessary for students to go around and talk, just look around and see what their students are actually writing on the note cards. And basically, it actually can help them and realize what their students think they need extra help on or what they think they've got covered. Because for me, when I'm writing down something on my note card, it's because I don't think I'm going to remember it. So I think it's important to realize, oh, this is what the student thinks that they're having trouble with.
And then back to Grace and Alex. So the other team said something about if you're allowing notes, people will take good notes during class and stuff. If you don't allow notes, is there a point in students taking notes then if they're never going to be able to use them on anything for a test or a quiz?
Well, I know me personally, notes do help me remember. It's that pen to paper type of feeling that helps me remember. And then when I'm studying, I can use the notes that I have taken, because I've had certain teachers that don't share the PowerPoints and they don't share what they're teaching. And sometimes you don't even get it from the book. So you only have your notes to study. And then you have to, by taking notes, you then learn from your notes that you took in class.
Yeah, and then also having an open notes test doesn't necessarily suggest that people are going to take good notes, because what's to say I don't not do anything when we're learning, but then I just go back and just look on the internet and find certain things and just write it all down on a note card and then do well on the test. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to pay attention in class or take good notes.
Fair. And I have a question, and either team can jump in here. In our last episode, we had a discussion about should students have to memorize things in math class, and there's a debate about multiplication tables. And I just wonder, is it okay if a student had their times tables written out on their notes? Is notes open to everything, or are there some things people should have memorized?
I feel like having your whole times table is a little excessive. I think it's really important to memorize things. I just think the whole math curriculum is not important to memorize, but of course, certain things it's important to memorize, especially the Pythagorean theorem. You just have that embedded in your mind. And so because you just have learned it so many times and just used it in so many examples in so many ways, that's embedded in your mind. But for certain things, I feel like it's not necessary to memorize it, especially if you're just going to use it once. But the stuff that you are going to keep using throughout your whole math career in middle school and high school, I think it's important to memorize.
I agree. I think taking the times tables example, memorizing it in first grade, second grade, it definitely helped then and in the moment kind of learn how multiplication works. But I feel like even now I notice with a lot of my peers, they don't keep those memorized. And sometimes they still need to write out or figure it out about like using their fingers or hands or something. But I think there are processes that can be memorized, like such as long division, that would definitely help. Like say you're not given a calculator on a test or something. But I think that I agree with Jahnie that there are certain things that might be helpful to have memorized.
Fair. Okay. Oh, go ahead, Grace. You want to add to that?
And we were just going to say that we agreed that learning the fundamentals of math and memorizing those, such as times tables, like that is built on throughout your math career. But learning processes like long division, I think that could be a note card topic or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, especially since those are things that are required in like everyday life too. There's a difference between that and like trying to memorize synthetically dividing polynomials or something like that. That's not actually going to be needed in your life. So, I mean, there's just a line between what is and is not needed.
You bring that up like you just talked about synthetic division or something. Okay, I have one last question. This is for everyone. And I kind of want you to speak to teachers here. Like, what would you say to teachers? And I'll start with Grace and Alex here. Like if teachers are very pro notes, they're like, I'm just gonna use notes, let kids use notes everywhere. What advice would you give them to like have them at least think about it more or second guess on sometimes?
For a teacher that's very pro note and that they never have no note assessments, if they have no idea like changing that mentality, then I would recommend just making your test more application based. Or for those teachers, you could maybe say it's closed note until the day of, and then you can have your notes that you took in class. And that could be a solution to combine the two for those teachers that are very set in their ways. But maybe I think it does, as Alex said in his opening statement, it helps you in the real world and in college, like just having some of these study skills that you've learned and accumulated.
Yeah, the teachers have to consider like what habits they're leaving the student with to move forward, right? Because most teachers will only get a student for a year or so, not several extended years. So it's just a matter of what you want them to take into college or the real world.
And then let me jump to then Briana and Jahnie. So what would you say to someone, a teacher who is against any notes ever? What advice or ideas or suggestions would you have for them?
I think kind of going back to what Alex and Grace said, it's just teachers need to think about what their kids are going to go through in the future. And in the future, we are going to be able to have those resources. We are going to be able to look back at our notes through our professions. And so I think to be really strict about no notes or no resources during tests, I think it's something to look back at and really think, well, if they can use this in the future, potentially, maybe I can just give them a little bit of a push or a help to really succeed in the class and on the tests.
Yeah, and if teachers take into account that in the real world and in the future, students are going to have access to unlimited resources when they're doing whatever they need to do, having notes available during a test is going to help the students apply their resources in the future and know how to use what and when to use their information that they've collected.
Wonderful. And I like that all four of you are really in that, like, it depends on. And yeah, it's a lot more nuanced than we think. And I think that concludes my questions.
And that actually concludes the questioning round. So we will now end by giving each side 2 minutes to make their final arguments to you.
Okay, closing statements. We begin with the pro side again that says students should be allowed to use notes on tests. And here to give their closing statement is Briana.
Jahnie and I still firmly believe that notes should be allowed during tests, and we have a few main reasons for that. The first being that notes being allowed on tests gives the student a sense of comfort and allows them to perform better without the looming stress of what if I don't remember this equation, or what if I forget this during the test because I'm so nervous. And if you forget a certain equation or a certain step to solving, it'll automatically mentally prepare yourself for failure, which can be very detrimental to your performance on the test. Even more so, having notes and taking notes will be better in the long run, because if you're constantly seeing your notes and you're writing down these notes, you're going to unintentionally memorize in the future. So it'll work for both sides. And knowing that notes are allowed on tests will actually prompt students to take better notes throughout the week, because they know that that's the information they're going to have on the tests. And finally, if teachers notice consistent gaps in performance on tests, it'll allow them to readjust their curriculum and target those concepts that students have collectively missed on those assessments.
Thank you, Briana. And with the final word for the con side, we have Alex and Grace.
First, we would like to mention that the opposing team made strong arguments, and the question, should we have notes, is very relative due to the teacher's teaching style. However, we believe that our arguments outweigh the positive impacts that our opponents mentioned.
To summarize our contentions, we believe assessments should be closed notes with the exception of certain given formulas. Our first contention is that students spend more time looking through the notes than they actually do problem solving during the tests. Our second contention is that the positive stress involved with assessments actually motivates a student to do better on said assessment. Our third contention is that the usage of notes yields bad study habits that will continue with the student into future education levels. And then our fourth contention is that whenever students are partaking in closed book assessments, they will gain a more in-depth mastery of a subject and will hold that information for a longer period of time.
All right. Thank you all. And that concludes our debate. You've given us so much to think about.
And now it's up to our listeners to take a moment, ponder the arguments, and consider what resonated with you.
And we'll pause for a moment to give you a chance to ponder. Feel free to pause the podcast and talk out loud with a friend. And go to our Twitter at DebateMathPod to vote for who you think was the more convincing team in this debate.
We will leave it up for 1 week and tally the results the following Wednesday night.
Huge thanks to all 4 of our student guests today.
You were all absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for your thoughtful, respectful debates. You were so good. You brought up so many good ideas, and you also found lots of great spots of agreement. Rob and I, we learned so much by listening to you.
And also, thanks to those who are listening. We hope you enjoyed and learned from this. And also, don't forget to hit up our Twitter and vote.
Don't forget to reach out to us with comments or questions. We can be found online at debatemath.com.
Or on Twitter at DebateMathPod. And if you have any ideas for us, you can follow along with hashtag DebateMathPod.
And we appreciate if you'd rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts.
Or wherever you listen to this podcast. Your feedback is definitely important to us.
Well, that's all from us for today.
And we're looking forward to debating with you more next episode. Until next time, cheers.
Bye.